Good morning, good afternoon, buenos días, buenas tardes a todas y todos. My name is John Lindsay-Poland. I coordinate the project Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico of Global Exchange. We welcome all of you today to talk about a number of issues and how they work together and what we can do about them. Um, we know that we are in a moment of unparalleled crisis and violence in the world. We know that the United States and the U.S. arms industry is feeding this crisis on many different levels through large arms and small arms, through policies, through culture, through an unrestricted market that is supplying both legal and illegal actors around the world, including in the United States, that are acting in other countries. Um, in Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico and Global Exchange, we are connected with many different movements who are addressing these issues from many different perspectives, from inside their communities, on policy issues, as researchers, and in different countries. And after the US attack on Venezuela at the beginning of the year, we decided we wanted to begin to connect those dots, connect those issues in ways that enable us to see the relationships between what we're working on, who is being impacted in different ways by violence, because we see that it's often the same firearms, the same weapons that are impacting people in Mexico, in the United States, in Venezuela, in Iran, in Gaza. The United States has a very, very far reach in the world. So we have invited an incredible group today to share with you. We will have time for questions and responses. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat in order to just share who you are and where you are if you're with an organization. And also, if you have any questions or comments, to put them in the chat because we will have time during this hour to have conversation and respond to concerns and questions. Um, I want to say just briefly at the start that we in Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico recently published a report called Corridors of Violence, which draws on very detailed data about where firearms in the United States are being purchased and then trafficked to Mexico and to other countries. These include 50 caliber rifles that fire over a mile, can penetrate armor, have downed military helicopters in Mexico, have no real use by civilians in the United States, and yet they are legal to buy in 46 states of the United States. We also were able to document that over the last 2 to 3 years, um, Arizona has become the epicenter of firearms that are purchased with an intent to traffic them to Mexico. And this has been particularly true since in the second half of 2024, violence between cartel groups in Sinaloa erupted after the kidnapping and extradition of one of the cartel leaders. Since that time, we have seen how firearms are growing in trafficking from Arizona down through Sonora, which borders Arizona on the Mexican side, and then down the Pacific coast to Sinaloa, where more weapons were recovered last year than any other Mexican state. And let's be clear, more weapons are recovered in Mexico and traced to U.S. purchases than any other country in the world by far. So the traffic of those weapons is enormous. Um, we can say more about some of these findings after we hear from our panelists. And like I said, we have an incredible array of folks for you. I will introduce folks one by one before they speak. First, with us is Sergio Aguayo, who is a full-time professor at the Center for International Studies at the Colegio de México since 1977. He has a master's and doctorate in international relations from Johns Hopkins University, and since 2014 has coordinated what is known at the Colegio de México as the Seminario sobre Violencia y Paz, the Seminar on Violence and Peace, which has an affiliation and alliance with the Public Health School at Harvard University. Since May 2025 of last year, he has been part as an expert with the platform Depolarization Community of Practice of the Institute for Integrated Transitions. Sergio has written dozens of books and academic articles. He writes and publishes a weekly column in the newspaper Reforma, which is published in 10 other news outlets. So I'll turn it over to you, Sergio, to share with us about the current context in Mexico and observations that you have about it in ways that help us understand how these things are connected.
Muchas gracias, John,
Thank you
me
very much,
honra
John.
haber sido
And I
invitado a
am
este
pretty
panel
honored to
con
be
tan
invited to
distinguidos
this
colegas.
panel with our
Seré muy
distinguished colleagues.
directo,
I will go
partiré del
straight to the point,
tema
and
de
I will start
las
with the
dos, de
thing
las
about the
principales
two of
vulnerabilidades
the
que
main
tiene
vulnerabilities
el gobierno
that
de Morena,
that
y
Morena's
tiene que ver con
government
una
has.
encuesta
And it
de
has to do
opinión
with an
que de hecho
opinion
es la
survey
misma que viene
that
desde hace
actually
muchos
is the
años.
same one that
El
we've been
presidente
having
es
for
muy
a couple of
valorado, en
years
este
now.
caso la
You know, the
presidenta Claudia
president,
Sheinbaum,
Madam President, Claudia
72%,
Sheinbaum, is pretty
pero
valuable,
su
like
estrategia para combatir el
72%, but
crimen
her
y la
strategy to combat
corrupción
crime and corruption,
reciben
well, it
78% de
gets a
negativos, es decir,
70% of
un
negatives.
lastre de los
That is,
presidentes
you know,
mexicanos es que
the
no han
drag
sabido
of the
cómo
other
responder
presidents that have not
al
know
reto que
how to
plantean
answer
los
to this
carteles
challenge
mexicanos
that
y
the
la
Mexican
corrupción
cartels and corruption
mexicana.
and Mexican
En este
corruption have.
sentido,
Now, in this sense, you
el
know,
análisis, creo que,
the
o la situación
analysis
en
or the
México y en la región
situation in
puede
Mexico and the region
sintetizarse
can be
por
summarized
varios
by
factores.
different actors.
Primero, el crimen
First of
organizado.
all, organized
Es
crime.
notable el
And that
tamaño
is
que ha
obvious,
adquirido,
the
en
size
buena
that
medida por
it's
la
grown to,
geopolítica, por la
and because
cercanía
of
con
the
Estados Unidos. Es uno de
politics
los
and
factores
how close
principales,
we
no el
are to the
único.
United States. That's
En
one of the
segundo
main
lugar, un nuevo
factors, but
actor,
not the
este es
only
más
one. And
reciente,
another
crimen
new
organizado
actor,
empezó en
and you know,
1920,
organized
21,
crime started in
con la
1920,
prohibición, fue
1921,
la
with
consecuencia
the
de la prohibición.
forbidden, it was
Un
consequence
actor
of
nuevo de este siglo son
prohibition.
las
The
grandes
new actor of
tecnológicas,
these
que se han
are the
convertido en un
big
actor
technologies that
poderosísimo
have
por varias
become a great
razones.
actor for different
En términos de
reasons.
la guerra,
Regarding the
que se han
war, you
convertido en
know, they have
aliados
become allies,
voluntarios e involuntarios,
voluntary
realmente
and
no lo sabemos, del
involuntary
crimen
allies,
organizado.
we don't know, for
Y
organized
en
crime.
tercer lugar,
And
el
in the
gobierno
third
del
place,
presidente Trump,
the
que
Trump's
además de
administration,
apoyar
that
en
besides
una alianza
supporting
estratégica
these
Trump y las grandes
strategic alliance
tecnológicas,
and the
como
big
bien sabemos,
technologies, as
lo
we
cual inhibe
already
al
know,
gobierno
which
mexicano
inhibits
de
the Mexican
normar, regular
government
como lo hace
to
Europa
rule
a las
normally as
tecnológicas,
Europe does to the
lo cual
technological
beneficia al
tools,
crimen
which
organizado. Es decir,
benefits
estamos ante
organized
un
crime. So
tinglado muy complejo
that is to say,
que
we are
limita el
facing a
efecto que
very
está
complex
teniendo una estrategia de seguridad
environment that
mejor
is
de
having a
parte de la
better
presidenta.
safety strategy
Ahí entraría,
on
por supuesto,
for
el
the
tema de las
Madam
armas,
President.
pero
Of course, we
creo
will
que
have the topic about the
vamos a hablar
firearms
sobre
here,
eso después.
but we will
Simplemente
talk
presento
about
un
that
marco
later.
general.
But this is like a
Frente a estos
general
actores
framework.
estarían los
Now, facing
actores
these
sociales,
actors,
entre
we
los
will
que
have
estamos
as well
nosotros,
the
los que
social
participamos en
actors, the
este
ones that we
panel.
fit in, the ones that
Representamos a la
participate in this
sociedad.
panel,
Y
that
me
we
parece
represent
que
the
el hecho de que
society. And
estemos
I think that the
mexicanos y
fact that us
estadounidenses
Mexicans
ya
and
refleja la
Americans,
manera
you know,
binacional
reflects
como
this
estamos teniendo,
binational way
manejando,
that we
enfrentando
are
el problema
handling and we are facing
de la
and
violencia y la
addressing this
corrupción
violence
mexicana
and Mexican
y
corruption
todo lo que está
problem
pasando en
and
Estados
everything that's
Unidos.
happening in the United
De
States.
hecho, en
And
los estudios que hacemos
actually,
en
on the
seminarios sobre
research that
violencia y
we
paz,
have
hemos identificado 6
on
actores
violence and peace, we have
fundamentales en
identified
la
6
manera
main
como
actors
evoluciona
as
el problema
in the way that
en
this
la
problem
periodistas
evolves.
different
académicos
academic
víctimas,
journalists that
grupos de
are
fe,
victims or faith groups or
religiosos,
religious
empresarios,
groups
creo que ya lo dije,
and
ONGs.
or
Cada uno de estos
NGOs.
actores
Each one of these
representa
actors
diferentes
represents
intereses,
different
diferentes agendas
interests,
y
different
tienen su propia
agendas, and
relación
they have
bilateral
their own
de una manera
bilateral
muy vistosa.
relationship in a
El
different
efecto
way.
conjunto de
The
estos
joint
actores,
effect of
de
all
los
of these
mexicanos y los
actors,
extranjeros,
Mexicans and
es
foreigners,
que
is
han
that
derrotado el
they have
relato
battled
gubernamental de que
this
están teniendo
government
éxito en el
speech
combate a
that
la
they are
corrupción y
having
el
the
crimen
success
organizado.
against
El
organized
relato que se
crime
impone
and
desde los
corruption.
80
The
es el de la
speech that is
sociedad,
given since
periodistas,
1980s
académicos,
is
en
from
fin.
the
No voy
society,
a detener en
journalists
eso.
and academics. I'm not going
Luego
to stop on
estaría
that. And then we
otros
will have
grupos,
other
múltiples
groups
grupos que
that are
actúan de manera
multiple
diversa.
groups
Ahí
that act
metamos
in a
a la
different way. And here
ultraderecha
we have the
y
right
al...
parties.
Ustedes no tienen
And
idea la
you don't
cantidad de
have
organizaciones
any
que hay
idea
en
the
un
amount of
país con
organizations that we
ciento
have in a
veintitantos
country
millones
with
de habitantes y que
120
además tiene,
million
es
citizens
enorme,
that,
una
it's
extensión
huge.
de
It
dos
has a
tercios del tamaño de
huge
la India.
expansion,
Es
two-thirds
decir,
of
somos un
the
país muy
India.
grande y muy
This is a
diverso
very
por
big
múltiples
and
razones. Por
diverse
tanto, el
country
tipo de
for
organización
multiple
social,
reasons. So
de
the social
violencia, de paz,
organization for
de
violence,
presencia de
peace,
Estados Unidos o de
the
influencia de
presence of
Estados
the
Unidos
United States
varía
or the
de
influence of the
una a
United
otra
States
región.
varies
En
from
esta
one region
división de
to
actores,
another.
lo que
Now,
más
in
llama la
this
atención es
actors division, what
que la
really draws
sociedad no
people's
está
attention
representada por
is that the
partidos
society is
políticos.
not
De hecho,
represented by the
tenemos
political
una relación
parties.
muy escasa con
Actually, we have
partidos
a very
políticos
scarce
que en su
relationship
mayoría
with the political
forman parte
parties
de la
that at
corrupción
the
sistémica
majority they are
que
part of this
aqueja
systemic
al país,
corruption
porque a
that
diferencia de
hurts
otros
the
países,
country
los
because
partidos
different from
mexicanos
other
reciben
countries,
fortunas
these
prerrogativas
political parties, they get
de,
fortunes
del
really
gobierno del Estado
from
mexicano y
the
del gobierno
Mexican
federal y
state
de
and
los
the
32
federal state
estados.
of the
Tal
32
vez
states.
hay un
And
partido que aún no está
there is one
legalizado, pero
political
que
party that it's not legalized,
promete que va a
but
ser
it
diferente. Vamos a
promises
ver,
to be
somos
different.
México
Let's
y
see
creo que
it.
hay que
We are
observarlo.
Mexico,
No,
so we
no
need
va a
to
tener
see it.
impacto en el
We need
corto plazo,
to
pero sí
oversee
en el
that. It's
mediano
not
plazo.
going to have
Cierro
a short
con
term
un hecho
impact, but a medium term
que no
impact. And
está de
now I
más
will close
enfatizar.
this with a fact
En
that
los
it's
estudios
important
que
to
he hecho
highlight. From
en
the
a lo
research
largo de los
that I
años,
have
me doy
conducted
cuenta que
along
estamos
the
ante un
years,
sistema
I see
regional.
that we are facing a
Así como
regional
la cuenca del
system, just
Mediterráneo
as the
determinó la
Mediterranean part that
creación del
determines
Imperio
the
Romano para
creation
empezar,
for the
o del
Roman
griego en su momento.
Empire or the
En el
Greek at
caso
its
de la
moment.
cuenca del
In the
Caribe
case
somos
of the
27
Caribbean, we are
países,
27
cada uno de los
countries.
cuales tiene
Each
un
one
papel
of these
diferente
countries
en
have
la
a
dimensión
different
criminal,
role
en
in
el
the
flujo de
criminal
armas, el flujo
dimension,
de drogas,
in
de
this
personas, en
drug
fin,
and
de
arm
todas
and
aquellas
people flow.
las arterias que
All of
alimentan y
these
conectan
arteries that feed and
a los
connect the
diferentes
different
países.
countries.
En ese
And in
sentido,
this
pues
sense,
este tipo de reuniones
well, these
sirven para
kind of
recordar la
meetings, they
importancia
are
de tener
helpful
una
to
visión
remember the
integral,
importance
yo
of
diría
having a
regional,
comprehensive and
dentro de
regional
la cual
vision,
los dos
among
principales
which the
actores
two
en el
main
tema de
actors
seguridad,
regarding safety
solamente no van
matters,
otros,
only safety
son Estados
matters,
Unidos
are
y
the
México.
United States and
Por tanto,
Mexico.
lo que
So
hagamos y
that is
dejemos de
why
hacer en México
everything
va a
we do or
repercutir
we
y se
stop
verá
doing
influido
is going
por lo
to
que
be
pasa en Cuba, Colombia,
influenced
Venezuela,
on what
América
happens in
Central,
Cuba, Colombia,
los
Central
países de habla
America,
inglesa, etcétera, el
the
Caribe, etcétera.
English-speaking
Pues
countries, the
ese sería para mí
Caribbean,
el
etc.
panorama
And that
incierto.
would be the overview or
Totalmente
the
de acuerdo con
environment.
John,
And
es un
yes, I do
momento
agree with John. This
particularmente
is a
incierto
specific
en
and
el cual
uncertain moment
es fundamental
where it's
entender que
fundamental
estamos en
to understand
una
that
lucha
we are
planetaria
in
entre
a
violencia y
fight
paz,
between
autoritarismo y democracia,
authoritarianism and democracy,
nacionalismos
peace and
y
war,
globalismos, etcétera,
nationalism and
que
globalism. So
ayuda
it helps.
a
It
grupos
really
como los
helps
nuestros
groups
o
like
individuos como
ours
nosotros
or
a
individuals
tener una
like
mejor
us to have
comprensión
a
de las fuerzas en las
better
que estamos
understanding on the
participando y de las
forces
cuales
that
también
we are
somos
being part
actores,
of and that we
a
are
veces
actors
menores, a
as
veces
well.
algo más
Sometimes
protagonistas,
in a
pero
lower measure,
tenemos mucho
sometimes
que
we
decir
are the main characters, but
y
we have a
tenemos
lot to
un
say
espacio
and
enorme
we have
donde
a very
influir.
big
Y para
space
ello,
to
pues el
influence.
conocimiento
And for that,
ayuda.
knowledge is really
Pues
helpful.
gracias, John.
So thank you, John.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. That's really the big picture that we are part of. It's always so important to remember that we're not just in these specific events in a specific location or a specific moment in history, but they are connected to the challenges of corruption in Mexico, the alliance between Trump and the tech world in the United States, the lack of representation of civil society, and so many of these other regional dynamics that you've outlined for us. Um, for context in the United States, we're turning to Christina Delgado. Christina is the national organizing manager at Community Justice. Her involvement in gun violence prevention efforts began after the tragedy at Santa Fe High School, which was the first school shooting in Texas. After that, events in Uvalde, Texas, showed the systemic disparities in responses to these shootings, especially for Black and Brown communities. Christina has built coalitions of survivors to advance legislation to support people affected by gun violence, including a state bill to ensure victim families access to autopsy and medical records, and working with Uvalde families to raise the age for purchasing assault rifles. She's organized survivors to advocate passage of the federal Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. She is also a mother of two and volunteers in her daughter's school district. She is leading Community Justice's efforts to develop and enhance grassroots advocacy in key states. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me here, and thank you all for joining in and tuning in. I think that when we're talking about what's happening with our families and communities, across the border, I think we need to really understand what community violence is. Some of those similar root causes that we see here in the United States, we see in other countries. And so I think that that's one of the important things that we need to talk through. We know that when there are disparities in, basic human rights, in basic human needs, we're talking about access to healthcare, access to education, access to, good paying jobs, access to housing. These are all some of those root causes that will allow people to be incentivized to engage in some of these activities that turn violent and end up, with folks catching charges and such. And so that's one of the things that Community Justice is doing across the country, is linking up with organizations to be able to address those root causes. And I think that it's so incredible for us to be here binationally and to be able to be having these conversations and collaborate together. Me as a Mexicana here in the state of Texas, I'm forever grateful that we have this ability to come together. The other thing we're with talking about the gun trafficking we've seen, coming across the states, I want us to really focus on why these things are being allowed to happen. In so many instances across the country, even more recently here in the state of Texas at Austin, at Buford's, a nightlife spot for a lot of our youth and young people there, were unfortunately gunned down by a AR-15. We have normalized the open carrying, permitless carry of firearms across this country. Not only that, but we have normalized the carrying of weapons of war. Various types of AR-15s, various types of modified firearms to increase capacity, to increase the firepower, and the fatality rates are increasing with that as well. And not only are we, with that being said, just like we are having without these federal blanket legislation, these universal pieces of legislation that protect all states, we have certain states that have certain policies. Some are very strong, have universal background checks, are holding, irresponsible and negligent gun owners accountable. And some states don't have any. In fact, some states are working very hard and tirelessly to continue to open this up to have anyone have access to these firearms. This is something that we need to be calling out. This is something that we need to be taking to our legislators, and even more so to our local decision makers and our fellow community members. I want to go back real quick to the normalization of of these firearms. With us allowing this to continue to happen, what we are now seeing, and we saw recently in Texas, is the continued demonization of our communities of color. Being that a lot of these guns are being trafficked in the states, into some of those communities that don't have access to healthcare, are low income areas, less access to education, and less access to things to be put in their hands when we ask them to put down a firearm. And with that, we're going to continue to see this demonization. We're going to continue to see these influxes of when these occupations are happening of federal agents within our communities, that we're going to see those, our brothers and sisters in these communities of color continue to be detained, to be roughhoused, and to even be their lives taken. So one of the most important things that I think that we really need to focus on is being able to come together, as coalitions, as citizens, but just as human beings, to demand that these changes happen. We have to have the universal background checks. We have to have the violence intervention programming. We have to have the funding for these programs to be able to reach those most at risk of engaging in violence and those most at risk of becoming traffickers. This I don't know if you touched on it yet, John, but we were happy to sign on to the letter that I think is another one of those very important pieces that we have to continue to work on. We have to continue to engage, and I encourage everyone to be a part of that. It's a very strange position that we are all currently in, I think, especially for our Latino communities, even myself myself and my family, as Mexicanas and Mexicanos, to see this destruction, and to see this country of the United States allowing this destruction to continue, of our homelands. Definitely want to always be a resource. I encourage all of you to, keep connected, stay engaged, and stay loud. Stay loud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Your point about the root causes of so much of the violence and the systemic inequalities is something always to keep in mind, a part of the context that we can never forget, even when we're focused in on very specific pieces of this. Those are structural forces that are leading to more and more violence. And your situation in Texas, as you note, is different from some other states within the United States. I often point out to people that if you buy a gun in Texas, it is more likely to be used in a homicide in Mexico than in a homicide in Texas. Um, and so we can't really see that trade without looking across the borders and the ways in which the inequities are being reproduced within the country, each of our countries, as well as internationally. Next we are going to, and I do again invite people to put questions or comments in the chat. In order to so we can have a fuller conversation in the latter part of this hour. But now I want to introduce Grace Fernández Moran. Grace is the sister of Dan Jaramil Fernández, who was forcibly disappeared in the state of Coahuila in 2008. Grace is the director of outreach for Buscando Desaparecidos Mexico, looking for disappeared Mexico, or Búscame, and a member of the Movement for Disappeared in Mexico, El Movimiento por Nuestros Desaparecidos in Mexico, and a human rights specialist with a focus on victims' rights. She holds a master's in human rights and constitutional guarantees from the Inter-American Academy of Human Rights at the Autonomous University of Coahuila. Thank you, Grace, for being with us, and go ahead.
Gracias, un gusto, gracias por el
Thank you so
espacio.
much for the space. As a
Como
victim or
víctima
a
o familiar de una
family
persona
member of a
desaparecida en
victim in
México,
Mexico who
pues
was
la
disappeared, the
preocupación
worry
porque sí en
about
incremento, la
this is
incidencia es
great
muchísima.
because
Estamos hablando de que
the problem has
nosotras tenemos
increased
más de
amazingly. We have
17
been
años
searching
buscando
for
mi
my
hermano,
brother for 17
construyendo
years,
de la mano de
trying to
los
build together with the
gobiernos las
governments the
políticas
public
públicas
policy
para
to
atender
deal with
la
the
desaparición de
disappearance of
personas y aún
people.
así
And even
en
then,
México
in
hoy en día
Mexico,
desaparecen
every day
aproximadamente
there's
49
49
personas
disappearances a
diarias.
day.
49
This is
personas
a
diarias
school
es un
bus full of
autobús
people, just to
escolar,
get a general
solo para
idea.
tener una
In this
dimensión.
country where there's
En
more
este
than
país en donde hay más de
140,000
140,000
disappeared
personas
persons, there's
desaparecidas,
only
únicamente hay
141 sentences
141
or
sentencias por
uh,
desaparición. Es
there's
decir,
been
una
only
por cada
141
1000, ¿no?
people have
Más o
been
menos.
sentenced. So that's one
Y
for every
el problema
40,000. So
es que
there's
no
only not
solamente son
only
los
the disappeared, but
desaparecidos,
also
también
the
son
not
los
identified
fallecidos no
deaths.
identificados.
The
La
president
presidenta
has
ha presumido con bombos y
boasted that
platillos
the
que han
indexes of
disminuido los índices de
homicides
homicidios
has
dolosos.
been
Y
reduced,
nosotros
and we
hemos
have
levantado
raised
la
our
mano para
hands
decir,
and said,
hey,
yes,
sí, disminuyen
homicides have
los
been
homicidios dolosos,
reduced,
pero voltea a ver a los
but look at
desaparecidos.
the
Van en
figures for
incremento. Si
disappeared. They
bien
have been
han
increasing,
reducido
even though
cerca de 30
there's only
personas
it's only 30
fallecidas o
persons
asesinadas,
murdered.
ese
This increase
incremento
in
de
15, 20
15,
persons
20 personas
disappeared, plus
desaparecidas,
the
más los
non-identified
fallecidos no
dead,
identificados, que
which
como no
since they
saben
haven't figured
si
out
los
whether
restos que se
the
encuentran
remains, the bodies
son
are
de,
of human
de
beings or
seres
animals
humanos o
are
de
not
animales,
counted.
no los
Nobody
cuantifican.
talks about
Nadie
the
habla de los
almost
casi 80,000
80,000 not
muertos no
identified dead
identificados
as
como
part of
parte
this
de ese
index or this
índice
percentage
o de
of
ese porcentaje
homicides
de homicidios
of man
dolosos, ¿no?
of
Y como
homicides.
hemos comentado en
As
otras
we have said
ocasiones,
in other
las
occasions, people
personas
disappeared
desaparecen
because they're
porque
forced to
las
disappear.
obligan a desaparecer. No es que se
It's
vayan
not like they leave
voluntariamente,
voluntarily
aunque hay situaciones
because
en
the
donde la forma en que
there are
los grupos
similar ways in
criminales
which
operan es
the way in
mediante
which criminal
invitaciones a
groups
trabajar.
operate is by
La gente
invitations,
se
quote unquote,
mueve,
to work.
como en el caso
People
de
move
Teuchitlán,
towards the
llegan
city
a ciudades en busca
uh,
de un trabajo y resulta que es el
to
crimen
go get work,
organizado
and it turns out that it's
obligándolos
organized
a
crime.
trabajar. Y entonces de
They
forma voluntaria
voluntarily
se ausentan de
leave
sus hogares,
their
pero
homes,
no
but they don't stay
permanecen de forma
voluntarily.
voluntaria.
And
¿Y
how
cómo
is
es que
it that
los hacen
they
mantenerse
stay outside
fuera de la
of
familia, fuera
their
de la
families,
protección de
or
la ley?
outside of the
Pues a
protection of
punta
the
de
law
armas.
is
Y es parte de lo que
through
hemos
weapons.
dicho.
And the
Los
disappeared do not
desaparecidos no se
go.
van,
They
los
are disappeared.
desaparecen
They are
y los
forced to disappear
permanecen desaparecidos porque los
because
grupos
criminal
criminales
groups
están
are
fuertemente
strongly
armados.
armed.
Una muestra del poder
An
de
idea
fuego, pues
of the
fue lo
firepower that they
ocurrido
have.
a principios
Evidence of this is
a
what happened
finales
at the
del mes
beginning of February
de
when
febrero, cuando se
the
dio la detención y
the,
asesinato del líder
the
del cártel
arrest and
Jalisco Nueva
killing of
Generación, el
the
conocidísimo
Alex El
o se
Mencho,
le era alias
the
El
head
Mencho,
of the
en
Jalisco Nueva
donde
Generación
sale el
cartel.
cártel a
The
generarle
cartel
estas
members came
olas
out
de
and created this
violencia,
wave
de
of violence
terror
and terror in
en
several
varias
cities in
ciudades
the
del
country
país
with a huge
con un
arsenal
gran
of
arsenal
weapons. And the question is,
de
where are
armas.
these
Y la
weapons
pregunta
coming
es,
from?
¿y de dónde vienen?
And
¿No?
that's where I
Y
go
ahí
back to what's
vuelvo
been
a lo
mentioned by
que
Sergio and
mencionaron ya
Christina, which
Sergio y
is the
Cristina, lo que es
origin.
el
It's not just
origen.
about
O
the
sea, no se trata
cartels,
nada
they
más de
have a
decir
lot
los
of
cárteles tienen
guns.
muchas armas.
We do not
En México no
manufacture
producimos
guns in
armas.
Mexico. In
En
Mexico,
México la compra de
it's not
armas
like you go to
no
the
es como que vas
supermarket
al
and it's your right
súper
to
y
have
que
a
sea tu
gun.
derecho tener un
Only
arma.
the
Solamente el
army can
ejército
have
está facultado y para que tú
permits.
puedas to carry guns. In order to have a permit, it's a really complicated and expensive set of regulations. So where are these weapons coming from? It's part of the exchange that criminal groups make with the ones who purchase the drugs. So drugs in exchange for weapons and money is part of the criminal business. Guns are just a tool for them to provide the drugs that are being consumed in the United States. And in exchange, the US, not just for drugs, they facilitate the way of production, the means of production, which is the guns with which they protect the business and they guarantee that these drugs can go through the border. So if we do not attack the root causes, the only thing that will happen will be that you decapitate a court head like the Menchus head, and then 5 or 6 come out. The cells or the cartels will be divided amongst the more powerful leaders, the ones that still have the criminal networks, the guns, the money, the influence in order to be able to operate in their line of work. So it's not just the consumption of drugs. We have to be clear. It's people trafficking with the purpose of sex exploitation, and also unpaid work. Also the issue of the clandestine trafficking of organs. And even if structural problems are not attacked from the root cause, both on this side, speaking not just Mexico, but also Central and South America, where drugs are manufactured, but also taking advantage of the economic conditions of people where there are no opportunities for work or for education, where it is easier for young people to find income working for these criminal groups than legal work that has very low pay for 10 or 12 hours of extreme physical work. And also on the other side, we have seen with concern the insistence of President Trump to come and finish off the cartels. But on the other side, we don't see the public policy on how to fight against consumption, drug consumption. They can come to Mexico and invade and destroy the cartels, but the cartels will move to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia. And the production will continue because as long as there is a demand for drugs, there will be production. So they go hand in hand. And that's why we make this call to have this synergies, this collaboration where we can generate regional strategies to fight against the structural issues that are the root causes of this. Mexico has been a country that has been clearly looked at and examined by international organizations, be the International Court of Human Rights or any UN agency. They have all come and they have made very valuable recommendations. But when you have a government like that of the Morena party here in Mexico, which says, I know how to deal with this, I don't need any help from international organizations and the international community, instead of saying, show us the results, starts questioning the international mechanisms. That doesn't help. So how can we from civil society reorganize ourselves to think about what should we do next? Should we go to the governments of the US to say, hey, one thing is that you want to help and the other one is that you are unable to see the problems that you have domestically, which originates all of this violence in my home and all this suffering at our place. So I want to invite all of you and all of us to keep building because the victims in Mexico are running out of options. we still it's been looked at under the 34th Article 24th of the Convention on Disappeared People of the United States. Even though there's no procedure, the issue of Trump trying to create its own version of the UN with its group of allies in Central and South America, that doesn't help us with keeping the international focus on international law, on rights that have been achieved and built in many parts of the world, to think about what else are you going to do. Today, the UN, I feel, has been significantly diminished by the US. And I don't know to what extent this is healthy, to negate, to diminish the capacity for advocacy of such an important organization that historically has been the one that can tell states, you are wrong in this, you're wrong in that, and what are you going to do to solve it? So I think it is a critical moment to think outside of the box and to think about new strategies on how to work on both sides. I insist, it's not just about ending or destroying criminal organizations, because as long as we do not have a financial disruption, a logistical disruption of the real capacity of cartels, and especially as long as there is no fight against consumption, which is the origin of all of this, it will be a vicious circle that it will be very difficult to break.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you so
Grace,
much, Grace, for that
por esa
presentation.
exposición. You really show us how urgent it is that civil society act and find ways to connect at a time when our governments are not fulfilling what they need to do, or even in the case of the United States, saying, "Well, yeah, we want to help you, but the way we're going to help you is with a military invasion by taking on the cartels with our military." But then, the Mexican government saying, "Oh no, we don't need these UN structures to monitor and support on human rights." So making all the more important action on collaboration between the civil societies across our borders, and finding ways that civil societies can really engage states, both the United States and Mexico, to get some movement, as well as what we can do ourselves. We're now going to turn to Ben Dooley, who has conducted an incredible journalistic investigation of the production of 50 caliber bullets that are used and in fact, by both state forces and by organized crime in Mexico, as part of Barrett 50 caliber rifles that are especially desired for combat, but are easily available for sale. Ben is a reporter for the International Consortium of Independent Journalists, based in Washington. He covered Asia for over a decade, started as a reporter in Washington and Beijing for Kyoto News of Japan. Spent 3 years in China with Agence France Presse before he was in Tokyo, and was also a business correspondent for the New York Times. He's fluent in Mandarin and Japanese, has a master's degree in East Asian Studies from Stanford, and a bachelor's in Asian Studies from the University of Virginia. So I turn it over to you, Ben.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the invitation, and it's great to be here with everyone today. So I guess the first question is, why am I here? After spending 10 years in Asia, my expertise is primarily in that region, but about 3 years ago, I moved back to the US to work for the New York Times on investigations. And one of the things I was assigned to do was look at the business of guns here in the United States. And very quickly, we came to the realization that a lot has been written about the guns themselves, but very little has been written about the ammunition that fuels those guns. And, as an ATF agent said to me not so long ago, without ammunition, a gun is just an expensive hammer. One of the things that we found very quickly, which I think is interesting and led to our later investigation to Mexico, is that surprisingly, the majority of the ammunition for assault weapons that's made in the United States is manufactured by the U.S., not by the U.S. Army, but manufactured on U.S. Army property by a contractor that provides most of the ammunition for the U.S. Army. So when you talk about an AR-15, most of the ammunition for the AR-15, at least 30% to 40% of the ammunition, maybe as much as 50%, is made in this government plant called Lake City, which is in Kansas, just outside of Kansas City in Missouri. And that was kind of a starting revelation because it pointed to something that I think people had thought about a little bit, but hadn't really understood the full extent of, which is the extent to which the American government subsidizes the market for and the production of ammunition for assault weapons. John mentioned the 50 caliber weapon, 50 caliber rifle, which is most popularly made by Barrett. It's a particularly interesting case. As you know, AR-15s are very popular in the US. People use them for lots of different things, mostly target practice. Obviously, people claim to use them for home defense, sometimes hunting. They are used in a lot of high profile crimes, of course, in the US. 50 caliber rifles are quite interesting to me because they have, as John said, no civilian application, but they don't in the US even really have a criminal application. It's very rare, almost unheard of, for a 50 caliber rifle to be used in a crime in the United States. So what's interesting, of course, is that they're used quite frequently in Mexico. And it's become a huge problem. And one of the things that we discovered as we were looking into the production of AR-15 ammunition at this plant, this Army-owned plant, is that they also were producing quite a lot of 50 caliber ammunition. And the 50 caliber ammunition, the plant under a company called ATK began producing that ammunition in around 2008 and for civilian sale. So up to that point, it had been mostly sold to the Army, used by the Army and to other governments. But in 2008, around that time, the US government struck a deal with the contractor that was running this facility that allowed them to sell to civilian distributors and retailers. And the idea was that this was going to save the US government money by allowing the company to sell commercial ammunition. The US government would get a discount on the ammunition it sold. And additionally, there were concerns about keeping the plant running constantly in case there was need for ammunition. So the idea was that there was a burgeoning market for ammunition in the US and for civilians. And if this company was allowed to sell that ammunition to civilians, then it would ensure that the plant was running 24/7 and would be able to fulfill whatever need that the US Army would have, when it wasn't fighting a war, for example. If there was a war that wasn't on and demand for ammunition was low, they wanted to ensure that the plants were constantly running. So what we discovered in our reporting is that the US Army had become one of the few sources of bulk ammunition, 50 caliber ammunition, to the civilian market. Now, the only people who were really using 50 caliber ammunition were hobbyists in the US. 50 caliber rifles are very expensive. They can range, the cheapest model you can get is about $2,000 for a single shot bolt action rifle, and they go up to $20,000, $30,000. An average rifle might cost $7,000 or $8,000. So it's a pretty small community of people who were using this, and they were typically buying their ammunition from manufacturers that were making and selling, 10 round packs, 50 round packs, whereas the Army ammunition was being sold in 150 round cans, could be sold in thousands, in the thousands. And what we discovered is that that ammunition was being sold primarily through ammunition dealers in Arizona and Texas, although in some other parts of the country as well, to straw purchasers who were then smuggling it into Mexico, where it was being used in a variety of attacks on civilians and the government. ATF did a report on this, and they found that at least 7 government helicopters had been brought down by 50 caliber ammunition, almost certainly from Lake City. And by our own count, I think we had there are 87 attacks since 2003 that used 50 caliber rifles, and given the time period, almost certainly it was all made at this government plant. Now there are two other manufacturers of bulk 50 caliber ammunition. One is a South Korean company, and one is a Brazilian company. But those are really the only three companies that produce it. And the Mexican government, after our report came out, said that I believe over 50% of the ammunition that they have seized, 50 caliber ammunition they have seized came from this plant, the Lake City plant owned by the U.S. Army. So I think it's really important to think about the U.S. government's role in subsidizing the industry, and it goes, in my opinion, beyond ammunition. It also goes to the weapons that are being used. Some of the most popular military-style rifles were either developed for the military or have more recently been designed with funding from the U.S. military before they were sold in the civilian market. And a lot of those are, of course, coming from the U.S. to Mexico, where they're popular with cartels. One thing that was kind of interesting to me is, it doesn't seem like ammunition is a difficult problem in the U.S. because there aren't really any federal regulations about selling rifle ammunition. Anyone over the age of 18, with very few exceptions, can buy it in pretty much any quantity. One of the things that we found was that handgun ammunition, there's some restrictions on the type of ammunition that can be sold. For example, armor-piercing ammunition can't be sold, generally speaking, but when it's rifle ammunition, anything goes. So one thing we were finding is that there were tens of thousands of rounds of this armor-piercing ammunition, which is exclusively made at Lake City, that were going across the border. They were being sold at from these bulk ammo dealers. One thing about ammunition too that's important to note is that unlike guns, if you only sell ammunition, you don't have to get any kind of federal license to sell it. So if you're a gun shop that sells ammunition, of course you have to be federally licensed. But if you sell exclusively ammunition, there are no requirements for licensure. So pretty much anyone can sell it. And it's an interesting situation now. The people who are straw purchasers who are moving this ammunition to Mexico, they are helping move this ammunition to Mexico. There are very few penalties for them. There's really no way to prosecute them, meaningful way to prosecute them. Typically, they'll just get a slap on the wrist. So it's created a situation where people can pretty much move huge quantities of ammunition with impunity across the border. And of course, that isn't just limited to 50 caliber ammunition. A much larger problem is 5.56 and 7.62 ammunition, which would be used in AR-15s and AK-47s, respectively. We've seen shipments of hundreds of thousands of rounds being seized by the ATF, and they estimate that probably there are tens of millions of rounds going across the border every year. One thing that I just think is interesting is that the U.S. manufactures millions of guns a year, but it literally manufactures billions of rounds of ammunition. This U.S. Army plant alone is manufacturing between 300 million to a billion rounds of ammunition a year for the civilian market. The country just flooded with it, and there really haven't been, I think, any serious attempts to try to curb its flow into Mexico. So I'll keep it short, leave it there. Happy to answer any questions people might have.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's true that ammunition, partly because it's so unregulated, gets very little attention, and yet there's many guns, both in the United States and Mexico, already out in our communities. They can't function without bullets, but the bullets tend to be invisible. So thank you so much, Sergio, Christina, Grace, and Ben. We do have one question from Arnie Alpert in the chat about whether there's been hearings about the Lake City Ammo Production Center in either of the House or Senate Armed Services. Arnie is from New Hampshire and has congressional representatives on both of those committees. I'm not aware of any hearing that they've held.
There haven't been hearings. Elizabeth Warren and some other folks have introduced a bill, I think last week, that is going to attempt to stop the sale of like city ammunition to civilians. I think it's unlikely that anything will happen with that. It's, one issue with it is the facility is kind of a black box. I know there have been numerous requests from Congress about for more information about commercial sales from the facility, and DoD has pretty much just stonewalled them. So it's not entirely clear what is actually going on there. We were able to dig up some data about it from confidential sources, but none of it's public.
Right. So it's sort of prohibiting it. Maybe congressional action could get some more information about it. Stephen Hargarten says we need to change the narrative from guns don't kill people, people kill people, to a narrative guns don't kill people, bullets kill people. So I want to close us out with a question for each of you. You've each presented some large contexts, and we know that at this moment right now in both Mexico and the United States and beyond, there are so many things happening. Most of them, if you open up your news feed, it can be very overwhelming. Especially I think if you're in the United States, but I assume in Mexico as well. So my question for each of you, you are activists, you're writer, researcher, doing advocacy, working on specific cases of things. In this particular moment, when there's so many different things going on, I'm wondering if each of you might take a minute and just say, how do you prioritize in this moment of what you're going to work on or how you're going to work on it? Because I think that's something that many people are struggling with. So anybody who wants to start. Sergio, you're unmute yourself. You need to unmute Sergio.
I'm sorry. I always write for society. So I think what is of interest for society this week, I write every week. And I don't write for the government. I always think, so I adapt the language to society, to different groups. Second, I select a topic that is in the arena in the moment. And then I surround it with history, the context, the future, and new information all the time. And then I subject the text to different experts, including a colleague that the gender language is very important, the sensibility. So I try to, I listen to her advice too. Sometimes I made a mistake with the way, the adjective I am using. So it's fascinating, complicated, but I think very useful process, weekly process.
Yeah, great. Grace, Christina, Ben, how do you choose? ¿Cómo escogen lo que van a trabajar?
Well, I can go. I'm not, as a journalist, I'm not an activist, of course, but I think we all can agree that reducing gun violence and illegal trafficking is a goal that everyone holds in common. And I think that what we're trying to do is when we think about our investigations, we always try to think about what could have the most potential impact. And I think that's a combination of, what will the public find interesting and what could result in a reasonable chance of resulting in change. So, I mean, those are the two factors that I really consider when we really consider when we think about projects. And of course, we write about a wide range of things, not just guns, but yeah, I mean.
So Sergio and Ben, as writers and journalists, are sort of looking at what is of public interest at the moment. Christina, Grace, ustedes cómo escogen lo que van a priorizar?
How do you choose what you want to prioritize?
Y si me permites,
If
entonces,
I'm allowed to,
pues justo, o sea,
Precisely, I'm neither a journalist and they call me an activist, but I am a person that is looking for a loved one. I'm looking for my brother because I love him, because I miss him, because my mother, my family, his children, we miss him. There are organizations, whether they're political conditions or peace conditions, whether they exist or not. I will still be looking for him. We don't have an option. We have to work with whatever there is, and we have to build whatever doesn't exist so that we can find them. So even when the global conditions are really complicated for doing anything, I was telling the organizations that have always supported us in Mexico, I started without a single peso. I keep working without a single peso, and I don't need a single peso to demand that my brother and all the other disappeared are searched and found. So for me, the conditions have always been difficult. But as we say in one of our most important slogans, we look for them because we love them. That's our motivation, and that's where we get our infinite funding because we never run out of love. And from that perspective, part of what we have been trying to do in such violent times where even though there is, you can see more the reach of violence of all of these weapons that are out there on the streets and in the hands of evil people. The truth is that it doesn't touch your life, it doesn't change your life until they take someone away. Either they kill them or they disappear them. And what is the motivation is love. So from love, we're trying to tell civil society, understand that my brother was a wonderful being with 1,000 defects, who was an excellent father that has been missed by 5 children who have grown with such a big absence in my life. Help me to have that no more children grow with this absence, that no more lives are touched, that they lose opportunities, or that we lose doctors, accountants, engineers. We're going to create generations that look at drug dealers and drug trafficking as an option for their life, and that's not healthy. So what we're trying to build is precisely that network, because we go back to all the struggles of being one with unity, with the strength of unity. And if civil society does not understand that they have to join us before they reach my situation, they will end up on this side, and we're going to receive them with open arms. But we don't want anybody else to suffer the disappearance or the murder of a family member, so that they can decide to start working on how to build justice and peace.
Gracias, Grace. Es eso, ¿no? Es que el amor nos guía para priorizar. Y no
Yeah, I
solamente
think
el
this
amor
is
que
what makes us
sentimos para nuestros
prioritize
amados, sino
certain
también
things,
el
the
amor de
love not only of
otras
our
personas que
loved
también
ones, but
tienen mucho
also
valor.
other people and people
Christina,
in
si nos
general.
puedes cerrar. Christina, if you can close us out with your thought on this question.
Man, it's hard to go after Grace. Muchas gracias, Grace, for your words. You know, as someone who comes from community and a community of survivors and has been affected by gun violence, you know, I prioritize the people. I prioritize the people. Each and every one of us who has had some experience in some capacity have now become credible messengers. We know the pain, we know the ripple effects, we know how our community, how our families, how our situations were prior to that act of violence, how we felt in that moment of violence, and we can now see the solutions to these acts of violence. And so it really starts in the foundation of community. being able to sit and listen to understand, not listen to respond. We know that the bigger picture is to get these changes. We know that the bigger picture is to change legislation so that we can save lives, not in one community, but in all communities, and even beyond that, across our entire continent, across all of the Americas. And I think that once we have the ability to do that, to listen, to connect, it is what fuels me to continue doing this work. It can be very daunting. You could be told no a million times, but I almost feel like if we pull back some of that childhood courage where no was never the answer, we would be able to continue this battle to the end, to be able to have communities where we can live amongst each other. Our children are not going to school practicing for their massacre, where we don't have to fear that our families traveling back and forth across the border will have to endure acts of violence. And we can ensure that whatever changes we make can be passed on to future generations, as opposed to us continuing to pass on trauma, which we know is one of those major ripple effects. And my call to action, I think, to everyone is each of your state houses, each of your city councils, your county offices, and even there on Capitol Hill. Those are all the people's house, and we are people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Christina. I think that's a fantastic way to end, with love and people and their value are what guide us in all that we do. Thank you, Sergio, Grace, Christina, and Ben, for your incredible presence and presentations. Thank you, everyone who participated. We will send out a recording of this, and as well as contacts for more information. Be well, hang in there, and stay in community.